everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Further Comments. Damien, Riehl, hello.
Horace Wu, very good to see you as always. And I see you wearing the right shirt to the concert that we're at.
Yes, well, I am feeling rather sore. My heart is suffering from a great deal of FOMO, and I am looking forward to talking to you and our special guest today, Ted Theodoropoulos, about ILTACON. Ted, welcome.
Good to be here, gentlemen.
Very good to see you. And for those who are listening and not watching, the reference I was making to Horace's shirt is that Horace has an ILTACON shirt on. I don't know what vintage of ILTACON that is, whether it's 2023. So it's a couple of ILTACONs gone by. But of course, we're recording this just a week after ILTACON. And I think all of us, Ted and I, certainly were running hair on fire. Sadly, Horace was not able to be joining us in person, but he was there certainly in spirit. I was singing Horace's praises to anyone who would have ears. So I think that's going to be the topic today, isn't it? Here's what we did last ILTACON. Does that sound right?
Well, I was going to call this episode Reflections of an Inflection. It's the point in time when everyone's now believing that large language models and AI is going to take over the world. I'm a bit of a hype skeptic. So we're going to talk about whether we are at an inflection point with ILTACON as the backdrop, because I've been catching up with people in the last week since ILTACON, getting a feel for like what people are talking about. And one of the posts that I saw on LinkedIn was Nikki Shaver talking about how there's like an urgency from the law firms and corporate teams to start buying Gen AI, and that if you don't buy Gen AI, perhaps you're going to be left behind. This is a lot of hype, but with every hype, there are grains of truth. So I want to throw this open first of all by asking you guys, what did you think of ILTACON and what were your big takeaways? Maybe Ted, you can kick us off.
Yeah. Well, first, the size and scale of the event continues to grow, roughly 10% growth from last year. So they had roughly 4,000 attendees in Nashville, and I think they had 4,400 this time. And it seemed like a similar ratio between vendors and ILTA members, which is roughly 50-50, if I recall them correctly. Yeah, the size and scale, the energy seemed a little more... It seemed a little more electric than usual. Last year in Nashville, they had great energy also. I think the venue helped. You know, they had musicians. You know, Nashville is Music City. They had musicians in the lobbies. And I think this year, Damien and I participated in the ILTACON Lives. So, which I thought that really brought a new level of energy as well, because it's almost like, you know, you seeing a live broadcast like you're in Rockefeller Square or something. You know, it was just kind of cool like that. So I thought the energy was incredible. I thought the content, honestly, I only made it to a handful of sessions because it was meetings, and then we were broadcasting live. But the sessions that I did go to, it was much more about experience sharing and much less about speculation on how this is going to work, you know, how AI is going to impact workflows. So I thought there was much more substance this year than last year when it comes to AI.
I've been to many ILTACONs, and this is probably the most exciting ILTACON by energy and by, I think, the glitz and glam of it all. There's a lot of venture capital and a bunch of private equity really throwing money at this frothy market, and I think that's being reflected in ILTACON. And I think one of the reasons it's such a frothy market is because we societally have wrung the efficiencies out of every single area of the economy except for two areas. One is medicine and the other is law. And medicine's really hard because you have to actually do human tests. But law, everything is words. So if you're a venture capitalist or a private equity and you can say AI is really good at words, it turns out, so let's throw money at this AI company that's going to tackle this thing that is totally inefficient, transform this. And so if I can throw a venture capital bet and maybe only 1 in 100 actually hit, but that one might hit really hard, that's probably worth it. So I think we're seeing that at ILTACON, is where there's a ton of frothy venture capital being thrown around. And I think that reflected in ILTACON.
I love the ILTACON live broadcasts, and I feel like there should be one of those at the front desk next year. And on the point about like lots of money being thrown, what I'm seeing is really interesting. There's kind of two things happening with vendors at the moment. One is there is a convergence of all the players where they're all providing very similar things. And second, all the new entrants are following suit and providing very similar things. So I feel like we're just getting like nothing that fresh. What do you think, guys?
I think so too, and I would be interested in what Ted is thinking. There's nothing that fresh, because if you're just a thin wrapper on the foundational model, then how much fresh can you do? There's only so much application layer you can do atop the foundational models. So anyway, so that's thing number one. And thing number two is that all of those thin wrappers are competing with Sam Altman and with Gemini and with Anthropic and OpenAI. And I don't know if you saw that with the GPT-5 rollout, the announcement is that Sam said that a huge percentage of queries to ChatGPT are health queries, the one as known as medicine queries. My regulator antenna turned up and I thought, oh, is he just saying that it's being used for the unauthorized practice of medicine? And the answer is probably, right? So if you think about how many regulators for medicine are going after ChatGPT for the unauthorized practice of medicine, because he just had on stage, this woman said, I had this diagnosis of, cancer, and here's all the ways that ChatGPT helped me with my diagnosis and try to figure out what was going on with me. That seems a lot like the practice of medicine here. So now just swap out medicine with law. And I would like to ask Sam Altman, what percentage of legal questions are asked of ChatGPT? If medical questions are 3 or 5%, then maybe legal questions 3 to 5. Like, can my landlord kick me out of my apartment, right? How many of those questions are going to ChatGPT today? And I would say that if you're a thin wrapper that is a legal AI startup, you're competing with Sam Altman, because so many legal questions are being asked of ChatGPT every day. And what regulator is going to go after Sam Altman and Google and Microsoft for the unauthorized practice of law or the unauthorized practice of medicine? And I would say the answer is probably zero. And so really, I think we're at an inflection point that all the people in ILTACON, that is everybody, is trying to figure out what ChatGPT is going to do next and what Gemini is going to do next and what Anthropic is going to do next, because they're really the competitors these days.
Yeah, I saw a interesting article from a venture fund called Catalyst that outlined, they did a really good job. They demonstrated a much higher level of understanding than I thought VCs really had on where things are very likely headed. But they had a really funny line in there, to your point, Damien, about legal being one of the last holdouts of digital transformation. They said if Rip Van Winkle woke up, the only thing he would recognize is a law firm. Which it is true. And in terms of, overlap in capabilities in all of these AI platforms, that's absolutely true as well. You know what was new, though, is the interoperability story. So that there was a lot of talk about MCP and agents and their ability to, the model context protocol and their ability to interoperate. And, I still think the agentic world, I don't think the legal world is quite ready yet. I do think 2026, there will be real scenarios where agents will take place and will play a key role. But I just don't think we're there yet. But the good news is the providers are starting to lay the foundation for interoperability to happen, which I was encouraged to see.
Yeah, interoperability is something that listeners aren't going to be surprised that I've been thinking about since my early Sally days. So you can imagine that interoperability is really one of Sally's biggest talking points. Take System 1 and make it talk to System 2, whether that System 1 is, LexisNexis, or that System 2 is iManage or NetDocuments or Thomson Reuters. If everyone is counting motion to dismiss using the same identifier or merger agreement with the same identifier, then they could be able to push and pull data amongst all the different vendors, the different law firms, and the different clients, all three of them being able to talk to each other. So in the old world, yes, of course you needed Sally to be able to be interoperable. Of course, now we have interoperability under new skins called MCP and A2A. So think of this kind of like neural net interoperability. And under one world is that MCP and A2A would use things like Sally. That's the legal data standard to be able to say, hey, System 1 needs to talk to System 2 and get all the motions to dismiss or all the merger agreements. Let's send the Sally identifier, unique identifier, to be able to say, hey, System 2, give me all of your motions to dismiss, et cetera. That's world number one, is where MCP uses something like Sally to be able to create that interoperability. Or system number two is neural nets know what a motion to dismiss is. And so maybe you don't need that unique identifier for MCP to be able to say, hey, System 2, send me all your motions to dismiss, or send me all of your merger agreements. And System 2 will just know what that is without even needing Sally or something like that, or Folio. So I guess I don't know whether we're going to be in world number one or world number two. I can see that world number one would be helpful because I, as a System 2 entity, could be able to spend a lot of compute classifying my motions and classifying my contract types. and then get a high percentage of precision and recall, that is accuracy, to be able to validate that that is truly a merger agreement or that truly is a force majeure clause. And then I can do that pre-classification. So then at test time, at the time of the retrieval, then I could be able to take that high accuracy classification and send it to system one, saying, yes, I, with a high degree of certainty, know this is a motion to dismiss, or no, this is a merger agreement. So I think that that's the benefit of system one rather than system two, is to be able to say, yes, we are going to use all of our neural net compute pre-classifying so that at test time, at the time of the query, then you're able to actually do that. But I don't know if that's going to win. Because it's so easy to go to system number two, to say, it's
cheap.
It's cheap, and it's, just throw all the data at it and let God sort it out, right? That's the thing these days. So I don't know whether system one or two is going to win out. What do you guys think?
Horace?
I have a view, but Ted.
My track record for predicting the future hasn't been great. So I don't know whether system one or system two are going to win. But what I do think is going to win is ultimately, from a strategic standpoint, firms that are investing in data management. Some data hygiene has been one of the weakest points of law firm technology strategy. I mean, they've done a very poor job of that over many years. And now we're all of a sudden in a place where that matters, right? 5 years ago, what were the implications of the business that your document management system was not tidy and you didn't have a consolidated data lake to run reports? Minimal, right? But now we're getting into a place where clients are expecting more, where technology has underlying dependencies that if your data's a mess, it's going to be really hard to leverage the full capacity of these new technologies. So I think firms are going to ultimately spend a lot of time doing things they should have done 5 years ago. In no time in the upcoming future are we ever going to be able to turn AI loose on an entire DM corpus, right? It's way too massive. The signal to noise ratio is completely skewed in the wrong direction. So we got to make sense of what we have, and we got to start using standards and taxonomies, like Damien described with Sally. So I think strategically, the firms that are placing an emphasis there, and there was a lot of discussion about that in the sessions amongst the vendors in the exhibit hall. So I think the right conversations are happening. Law firms are just way behind. They're going to have to play catch up a little bit.
It's always hard convincing partners to play catch up and invest in stuff that they're not going to get any benefit from because they're retiring in 10 years. So,
or 2 years.
I think how much money have you made this year? I think it's going to be a blend of both system one and system two, like the build and buy decision that people are talking about these days. I think the top 1% of quality data is going to go through what you call system one, Damien. It's going to be classified, it's going to be tagged, it's going to be used over and over and over again, because that sort of like gold standard information is going to be determinative for a lot of what lawyers want to do. But then the rest of the 99% that you don't want to spend time and compute working on, even when it's really cheap, you would pick up when you need, run it through a large language model, it will get an on-the-fly classification, whatever that might be, and it's going to be used in some fashion. I think it's going to be that ultimately. And the hard part is then going to be people deciding, well, what belongs in that 1% of gold standard documents and precedents? And I don't think there's an easy way to do that. I don't think you can have a language model decide that, because if you do, you've already run 100% through language model, right? So what do you do? One of the really interesting conversations I had, so I was actually at ILTACON before ILTACON. I was there for like Friday to Sunday with the organizing committee. And one of the conversations I had was this idea that the most important people inside law firms in the next couple of years are going to be the transformation experts, the people who will ensure that the technology and the behavior, the behavior of people is transformed so that they can adopt technology in a way that's actually going to be effective. And I think that's right. I think law firms have also underinvested in L&D.
I think I agree. And one of the reasons for that is that there's the non-lawyer ownership aspect of law firms. So maybe that innovation lawyer could have a seat at the table. I often think of any job as, are you a profit center or are you a cost center? Because when I was a profit center at a law firm, if I wanted a new laptop, bam, I get a new laptop, right? Because I was making the firm money. Any minute that I don't have a laptop, I'm making the firm less money. So I would be able to get a laptop like that. But my friends who are in-house counsel that are cost centers, they're like, I have to wait months for that laptop, right? Because who cares, right? Oh, that cost center just can't do any more cost centery things, right? So really, as we think about profit centers and cost centers, where's innovation? An innovation lawyer, are they a profit center or are they a cost center? Do I respect them or do I not respect them? And I think the real winners on the innovation lawyer side are going to be those that are going to, I think, rightly convince their powers that be that are writing checks to be able to say that they are truly profit centers, that we will make more money and more profits with me than without me. And by the way, our lunch is going to get eaten by our competitors if you don't have me. So I think I agree that innovation people are going to be the most, well, they already are the most important people. But I think that law firms will recognize that they are the most important people in law firms.
Should they be lawyers? Like, should CNOs be lawyers?
Maybe. So like I've been thinking a lot about how technical people, like think of people that can code, right? That used to be the key of the realm, right? That used to be like, oh, of course, you can code up some Python. So let's go ahead and make you build software. You build this new app or something like that. Like in the old days, for example, I worked at Thomson Reuters and I would build a bunch of requirements as a subject matter expert. And I would say, hey, tech people, now build software based on these requirements that I've done. But today, the software is the requirements. That is, the prompting is the software, is the requirements, right? Does the chief innovation officer need to be a technical people these days when you can vibe code Python? Or do you need to be a subject matter expert to be able to say, this is the way we do these kinds of deals, or this is the way we do this kind of litigation? And then you could be able to then make all the workflows for what is substantively the right thing to do. Maybe I think it's helpful if you're a lawyer, because then you can vibe code a lot more.
Well, I would let me throw a curveball at you. So I did an exercise where I took the, I don't know, however many attributes it is, 7 or 8 that Dr. Larry Richard has mapped out as common personality traits for lawyers. And then I mapped that against the 5 personality traits that Mark Andreessen laid out for innovators. And there's not a ton of overlap, which I thought was very interesting. So for those that aren't familiar with Dr. Richard's work, he spent 30 plus years, wrote a book called Lawyer Brain. It's incredible. 30,000 plus lawyers have been put through this assessment. They're very high in skepticism, autonomy, urgency, abstract reasoning. They're very low in sociability, resilience, and empathy. Okay, for what Mark Andreessen listed out as very important to being a good innovator: open to new ideas, not lawyers. High level of conscientiousness, that's lawyers. High in disagreeableness, that's lawyers. High IQ, that's also lawyers. But also high in resilience, and that's not lawyers. So I think that if you look at the picture of, and these are your typical, this is, a very bell-shaped curve and that fit within a few standard deviations. There's outliers in both directions. But overall, I think that lawyer personalities don't always map well to risk-taking, to resilience towards setbacks, towards challenging the status quo. And I think that to really maximize the effectiveness in that seat, it may be a lawyer. I'm not saying don't include lawyers, but requiring that it be the lawyer, a lawyer, a classically trained lawyer, I don't know that that's the right answer.
I think that you're right about the distribution curve. Of course, that you've just described the bulk of the bell of the distribution curve. But of course, that the outliers are people like Joe Green from Gunderson and Stephanie Gautos, who is his colleague. They are some of the best innovators, both lawyers, right? Dr. Larry Richard's traits. I think they have none of those things. I mean, or they have none of the bad traits, and they have all of the good traits that are required, right? So the question is, should every lawyer be an innovative lawyer? No way. We need maybe lawyers that are on that end of the distribution curve that don't have those bad traits, but are instead able to take their subject matter expertise and say, let's do things forward-looking.
Yeah, and I had this debate with Richard Tromans on the podcast, and he said, there are a ton of innovative lawyers. Look at Marty Lipton, the poison pill from the 80s, Wachtell Lipton, who pioneered that approach. And I was like, are you going to take Marty Lipton out of the practice and put him in an innovation role? Of course you're not. So, sometimes the outliers are better off in the practice. But, people who love that work, like Joe and Stephanie, who are amazing. And I'm not saying, don't put lawyers in that seat. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying, don't make that necessarily a requirement. Look at a full array of options. And you do need that perspective. Like, if you're innovating the practice of law, you do need to have some understanding there. So I just encourage openness to new ideas around that.
I think that's
100%
right.
agree.
I think a difficulty, though, is I don't know if this is one of Dr. Richards' bad traits, but egotism is something that lawyers have a lot of. We as lawyers often think that we're the smartest people in the room, maybe because we're lawyers. And so we look at somebody who is a quote unquote non-lawyer, we look down on them. We say, oh, they don't have the golden ring that I have. That is my brilliance of being a lawyer. So I think the headwinds that an innovation person that is not a lawyer will have is that they will not gain the respect, rightly or wrongly. They won't gain the respect of the people that write checks that are lawyers. So I would say that if you can get a Joe or a Stephanie that has that lawyer ring, that could be respected. And especially if they have a bunch of years of practice under their belt, that they're not just a law school graduate that has never practiced, but wow, Joe actually practiced for a long time. And Joe actually knows what the hell he's talking about. So when Joe says a thing is probably right, it's probably right. Rightly or wrongly, they're going to respect Joe more than they'll respect a non-lawyer who doesn't have that golden ring.
Yeah. And I think that has to change. I think that is a cultural norm that is destructive towards progress in a transformation like this. It is deeply embedded, and I completely agree with you. That's not going to happen overnight. That's going to be a long process. But I think as this industry evolves, that sort of stuff has to go in the trunk, not even in the back seat. Certainly not in the driver's seat, which is where it is today.
Maybe. So so if we think about all the people that Ted and I saw down in all the booths down there, a lot of them are founded by lawyers, right? People that said, oh, I've practiced for a while and now I have this really good idea and now let's hang out a shingle. But a lot of them are quote unquote non-lawyers, Silicon Valley types and Stanford grad types that say, hey, this seems like a really good market that I as a tech people should just get into. I look at their bright, optimistic faces and I realize, oh, you are going to fail so poorly because you don't know the problem you're trying to solve, right? If a non-lawyer, and I hate that term, let's say somebody who doesn't have a law license, if somebody who doesn't have a law license is in that innovative role, they truly need to know the problem that they need to solve. They need to know the pain points of their lawyers and people that are delivering legal services like paralegals and others. They need to know the pain points and they need to know ways to solve those pain points because a true technical person without that subject matter expertise is going to fail horribly.
Yeah, I can point to some real successful cases. Dave Bolin at Ogletree Deacons, Kate Kane at Shepherd Mullen, right? These people aren't lawyers. In Dave's case, he came from public accounting and they have been massively successful. So yeah, again, I don't think it's a binary conversation. There's, I think there's a spectrum, but I do think that as we enter this tech-enabled legal service delivery world, cultural norms like you got to be a lawyer to sit in that seat, that has to change for us to really maximize our potential and honestly survive as an industry.
I agree with both of you, and I'm going to throw a simplification in there. And I think ultimately it just comes down to empathy. Whoever's in this seat needs to empathize with the users of the technology, the people that they're trying to change. And as long as they're listening and empathizing and doing that job, it doesn't matter if they have a legal background or not. Like having a legal background helps you understand them. It helps the empathy, but it doesn't determine success.
That's 100% right. And it reminds me of some of the wisest words I as a product person have ever heard. I can't remember which Silicon Valley product person told me this, but the user is not like you. And that seems simple, but it is so profound that we as builders think, of course, this is the way I use the software. So every user is going to use the software like me. But if you've ever seen a user use your software that you've built or somebody else, and you've actually done these kind of ride-alongs where you don't say a word, you just say, go ahead and use the software. I'm not going to speak, I'm going to watch. And you see how painful it is when the user is not like me. The user doesn't get things in the way that I get things. So I would say that empathy that you talked about, Horace, is absolutely necessary, that because no user is like me. And you have to be able to listen and be able to say, oh, now I see where you're coming from. Therefore, I can build the system in a way that is more empathetic. I agree.
But this is a good segue into talking about one of the key themes from ILTACON, which was people have stopped speculating, Ted, as you said, and have started sharing the experiences. What's been successful, what hasn't been successful, what worked, what didn't work. And I think one of the interesting statistics that I've been hearing behind closed doors is the adoption rate of Gen AI platforms typically kind of level off at around 20% of law firms. That's it. You buy 100 seats and you end up having 20 users of these tools, and they're paying a lot of money for these tools. So from your perspective and from your conversations, Have you heard reasons why it's been like that, or exceptions to the rule? What's been successful? What hasn't been? What's going on?
Well, you saw the post from Raymond Blythe that I was tagged in. Did you see the MIT numbers? It was 95%.
Oh, I love those numbers.
They sure are interesting. So yeah, for those that aren't aware, there was a MIT study. It was fairly informal. I think there were about 350 respondents. Some were surveyed, some were interviewed. And the conclusions were that only 5% of Gen AI initiatives move the dial on the P&L. And then you got to start asking yourself, and they did. They asked, well, why? And a lot of users of these enterprise grade AI tools would fall back to the general models because there was too much friction with the enterprise sanctioned. We're transitioning from BYOD to BYOAI, right? It's like bring your own AI tool. So I think change management plays a massive role in that. Like the tech is the easy part. Buying the license and pushing it out, having your IT department push it out to your users is easy. It's the change management part that's hard. Talk to Julia Montgomery. She beats this drum all the time at King & Spalding about how important change management is and how little focus most law firms place on that discipline. And if you look at to both of your points about empathy, what disciplines are empathy really important? User experience, it's like at the top of the list. So it is with change management as well. So user experience and change management really have to be a focus if you want a rollout to be successful. And a lot of law firms struggle in those departments.
I think that one of the reasons that law firms struggle in that is that law firms are not made to be product people. Law firms are in the business to practice law. What struck me most about that study, about most of these AI initiatives failing, is really what they're talking about is a build versus buy initiative. I don't know if you saw part of the study, but those who built are more likely to fail than those who bought or rent. And whether that's buying off the shelf or buying a specific solution, the builders almost always fail. And I think the heart of that is because law firms just aren't in the business to build products. That's problem number one. And problem number two is that I, as a product person within a law firm that is doing innovation, have to serve many masters. And often the master is the person that's writing my checks. There's a problem that I don't know if you guys have heard of. It's called the HIPPO problem. The HIPPO, HIPPO, stands for the highest paid person's opinion. And often the HIPPO wins because, okay, the managing partner says that we have to have this button here. So God willing, we're going to have that button here, right? So the HIPPO problem is really hard because you have to serve all of these masters. And you don't just have the managing partner, but you have the entire partnership, all of whom say that they have to have their button on there. So so this study that says almost all of them fail, of course, they're almost all going to fail because they're going to have, one, not product people, and two, they have to serve all of these masters in a way that is impossible to do. So build versus buy, it makes more sense to be able to buy something, whether it's off the shelf, just your foundational model, or something that is an application layer on top of that. Of course, those are going to be more successful.
I think those solutions have to be not so much point solutions, but they have to be focused. They have to be focused on what problems they're solving, because ultimately people will go to a solution if it helps them. And if you give them like a blank slate, a blank canvas, yeah, okay, it can help you, but people are not going to spend their imagination trying to figure out how to use a blank canvas. I heard an interesting story to kind of go back to your previous point, Damien, about hippos. There's a firm that we know, they've resisted buying an AI platform for 2, 3, however many years they've been going around. And a couple of months ago, the managing partner picked up the phone to the head of the innovation team and said, one of our clients has asked why we're not using Harvey. We're getting Harvey. I don't care. You're buying it now. And that was it. That was all the effort from this law firm, all of the energy of choosing the right solutions down the drain.
Thanks, marketing.
Yeah, so I think that's the partnership model, right? So, and there are different iterations of the partnership model, right? So the Big Four, they're also a partnership. They have a very different iteration of the partnership model than law firms do. So in the Big Four, they actually have empowered management that with CEOs and like people that make decisions that aren't accountants, right? That are professionals in their chosen area of discipline. And law firms have some of that too, but the consensus-driven decision-making and the rainmaker effect, that where an influencer, somebody who's very influential in the practice because they're the best at lawyering and coming in and making IT decisions or technology decisions that have strategic implications. Like, that's a very flawed model. And so I really think in this next iteration, this Big Law 2.0, the partnership model has to die. I don't think it survives because you don't have traditional. I mean, look at the biggest law firm in the world, $8 billion, Kirkland and Ellis. That wouldn't even qualify to be in the Fortune 500 if they were public, right? So law firms don't scale very well. And this is one reason. In a traditional C Corp structure, you have shareholders that elect a board that installs management and holds them accountable, and management is empowered to make decisions. That model scales, and it's proven by financial performance. The law firm model, the partnership model, has real limitations, and it boils down to situations like you just described, Damien. That can't happen. You can't scale an organization and have dynamics like that in play.
And I wonder if what you've described, Ted, is already happening with the Arizona ABSs, alternative business structures, where you can be a KPMG and they are an ABS in Arizona, and they're practicing law just like any other law firm in Arizona, because under Arizona law, an Arizona ABS, KPMG is a quote-unquote law firm. My friend Lucian Pera, who is an ethics lawyer based out of Nashville, but he helps ABSs in Arizona to be able to say, here's how you can lawfully practice law in all 50 states as an Arizona ABS. You might say, oh, well, how can you do that? And one of which is to be able to say, if you are doing patent law, for example, a federal thing, I, as a Minnesotan, can be able to give patent advice to a Californian because this is a federal thing. So one is if it's a federal area of law, I, as an Arizona ABS, can be able to practice law in all 50 states. Similarly, if I'm an Arizona ABS, I can pro hoc vice in the litigation side to be able to then partner with a local law firm, and then I can practice law in all 50 states. So I've just mentioned 2 of the 5 ways that Arizona ABSs can practice law in all 50 states. So Ted, I wonder if what you've described is, having this partnership structure kind of fall away in favor of a more scalable solution of C Corps and S Corps and et cetera. I wonder if it's already happening under our noses with Arizona and whether that's just scaling.
Have you seen Michael Bomarito has a wiki page that tracks the stats of the ABS count in Arizona, Utah, DC is also another, and Puerto Rico. So those are kind of the 4 places within the U.S. and its territories where ABA Model Rule 5.4 is either adjusted or redefined completely around non-legal ownership. And now you also have, did you guys see the news about Burford Capital coming in with and this has already happened, but they have MSOs, managed services organizations, that they're using as a vehicle to invest in law firms. So law firms essentially spin off a managed services organization that Burford Capital invests in, and that almost like a mini ALSP. Like, if you look at the definition, and I did, like, what's the difference between an ALSP and an MSO? The difference is an MSO is designed to outsource an entire function within a corporate legal department. So, for example, all of your IP work might go to an MSO, where an ALSP is more horizontal and tactical. That's the way it was defined, the few sources I could find on that. But that's also another mechanism through which private capital can make its way into the law firm world, even with, Rule 5.4 in play.
And what you've described, it seems like what's old is new again, because that's kind of like ClearSpire was back in the day. Atrium and then ClearEX is kind of doing the same thing. You have the law firm side, and then you have the quote unquote non-lawyer side. This is an old idea that is maybe getting new traction.
Yeah.
I was talking to Max Patterson from Brighter, and I won't say any more about who we're talking about, but one of the law firms that they work with, they've got, I think, like he said, less than 10 lawyers. But with a staff of non-lawyer of nearly 100. And it's because the staff can get everything done, put it in front of lawyers, they look at it, they review it, they sign off, and away it goes. The leverage of that model. Now, it's a very specific type of law where it can actually happen like that. But that leverage model was incredible. I hadn't heard an example like this before, but it's where I think lawyers can gain a lot of multiples. And it's happening also with a lot of frontier law firms that we're seeing come up. I forget the names, but there's a couple that have gotten VC funding in the last couple of months.
Crosby?
Help me out here. Yes, Crosby is one of them. And there's another one, and Garfield. Thank you. So they have a very different take on using technology. They have a very different take on both technology, talent, resourcing, the way they approach work. And big firms are not positioned to adjust. Not even big firms, traditional firms are not positioned to adjust like that in our own experience this week. So I'm just going to relay a story about what we are learning this week, which I very rarely do, by the way. So I'm just going to share it. We, as a company, as Cynthia, we don't typically go and do any kind of outbound sales. It's not in our DNA. We've never done it before until 2 weeks ago, when we launched a SaaS product called Supercomparer. So now we can go and do outreach to smaller firms. And so we got an SDI in. He's doing his outreach. We launched this last Tuesday. Between launch and now, we've had about maybe 4 or 5 frontier small law firms sign up. And yeah, it's awesome. We never reached out to any of these guys, by the way. They found us and they signed up and they're testing. In the same time, our SDRs probably reached out to 30, 40 traditional law firms sized between 10 to 50 lawyers. None of them have taken this up. And in fact, 2 of them have written it back to us saying, please do not write to us again. And one of them even wrote a quote, "We have our IT sorted, thank you." And we're like, wait, this is a product that doesn't exist anywhere. What do you mean? What are you even talking about? And the disinterest and lawyers' resistance, I think it's going to be quite challenging. So on the one hand, we're hearing at ILTACON, all the firms are going, wow, Gen AI, we're adopting it, we're using it. But on the other side, you're like, here's actual tech that you could use. Here's whether or not it's Gen AI, and we're getting resistance. It's a very strange, almost 2-track economy here.
I have 2 initial reactions to that. One is that law firm that wrote back saying, we have our IT sorted, thank you very much. My initial impression is like, well, they're not going to be around 5 years from now or 7 years, because what client is going to want to go to them? At least that's my knee-jerk reaction, saying, if you're a Luddite like that, then you're probably going to go away. But then the other side of that coin is maybe they have plenty of clients that don't know any better, that don't know that could be done better, faster, stronger. I would say that both of these things might be true. That is a lot of law firms might go away because sophisticated clients will not hire them because they're just Luddites. But the unsophisticated clients will continue hiring really crappy law firms that have yesterday's tech, like they've been hiring crappy law firms that have yesterday's tech for the last bunch of decades. And I think this goes back to what Horace and I have talked about earlier, is that really a big practice of law is the practice, the substantive practice, but it's also sales. For any product in the marketplace, you could buy a shitty product from a really good salesperson. And one can imagine a lawyer being a really good salesperson that sells a crappy product, but still gets a lot of work. So I go both ways, that maybe they'll go away because they're just bad, or maybe they'll stick around because they're really good salespeople, really good quote unquote rainmakers. What do you think?
So I think the number of clients that meet the criteria that you just described there is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. So I own 2 small businesses. InfoDash, we have roughly 50 employees. I own 5 gyms here with my wife in St. Louis. We have about 120, 140 employees. So small businesses by most standards. And I have been using AI in tandem with my legal partners on every task. Let me throw you some examples. Operating agreement amendments. So we converted to a C Corp for this program called QSBS, took a C Corp election. We had to, but we're still an LLC, so we had to update the operating agreement. There was this unanimous consent provision in there that where a minority shareholder could hold everybody hostage for an OA amendment. Huge problem. AI caught it. I ran my 409A program, which is like shadow equity. Like, man, it listed out. I had it list out the all the risks, to risk rank them, and also to rank them on the likelihood of occurrence. And it did a fantastic job. We hired and I used lawyers to remediate all of these things, but they were my first line of defense. We hired a company from a competitor, and he had a non-compete. And so we went in and role played with an AI model, multiple AI models, and said, how do we steer clear of infringing upon this non-compete? And it helped me craft the job description accordingly. Like, I'm as unsophisticated as you get. Yeah, I'm a tech guy, but my wife she can barely turn on a computer, she'll never listen to this. So extremely intelligent, but just doesn't like tech. And she's using, ChatGPT all the time. So I feel like that universe of clients that will send business to these firms that haven't modernized, I think that number is going to get smaller and smaller very quickly.
I think that's right. And I have two impressions to what you just said, Ted. Number one is, did OpenAI do the unauthorized practice of law when you put up that operating agreement and give you that legal risk? As some people define it, yes. But was it helpful to you as somebody who doesn't have a law degree? Absolutely. And how many people are using this every single day, and they don't think of this as a legal problem. They just think of this as a business problem that they have to solve. So I would say that lawyers' lunch is going to get eaten just by OpenAI and Google and Microsoft, not because Google and Microsoft are trying to eat lawyers' lunch, but it's going to be like an elephant stepping on an ant. They just had no idea they even stepped on this ant, but they're doing it right now. So that's idea number one. Thought number two is that if I were in your position, I've been doing this a lot, to put the operating agreement into model number one and then run it in model number two and model number three and kind of get a mixture of those experts. So you don't just get one legal opinion, but you get a second legal opinion, and a third legal opinion. And I actually did this on vacation. My wife and I were up in Brainerd, Minnesota, which is up north. On a lake in Brainerd. And we thought, gosh, we should really buy a lake home. So I spent a lot of my vacation running through deep research and Google. What are the things I should be thinking about on investing in a lake home in northern Minnesota? Should I pay for it with cash? Should I buy it, get a mortgage? What's the comparison with investments with the stock market, right? So I did all this in Google, and then I ran it in OpenAI's deep research, and then I run it in Perplexity's deep research. So now I have 45 or 50 pages each, so about 150 pages total. And I put those 150 pages into Claude, and I say, here are 3 research reports. Why don't you give me a synthesis of the most important aspects of this? And then it gave me a really nice report, and then I said, cool, now condense that to something I can explain to my wife what the right thing to do is. So I've been calling this internally within VLEX, I've been calling this the accordion, where you start out with something small and expand it out to 150 pages so that you can shrink it back down to something small again. So I think that this is probably what we're going to be doing. We're going to use this mixture of experts, whether it's OpenAI, Google, or others, and be able to run a bunch of these questions and then synthesize them back all together in kind of a meta-analysis.
And more clients are going to be doing that, and less law firms, as Damien, I'm going to quote you, you're not even going to get that phone call and you won't know why.
That's right. That's right. And speaking of that, discussion on ILTACON, but Salesforce said on stage that our external spend that we brought in-house as of July was about $3 million as of July of 2025, and they're on their way to savings $5 to $6 million by the end of the year. So that's $5 to $6 million that they used to spend in external spend, and they brought in-house by using tools like mine and others. And they said they're hoping to make that even bigger next year. So Salesforce loves their partners. So I won't speak for Salesforce, but I would say that for any big company, they're doing the same thing. I've been at many clocks where they say, oh, we did this proof of concept. It went wildly well. So we're going to 10x this proof of concept, and we're just going to bring all this work in-house. So I think that the law firms that stick around are going to need to compete with Salesforce and compete with Ford Motor Company. My friend Darth, who said in Bonnie Doon, he said, hey, law firms, you have a new competitor in town. You know who that is? My team. I'm competing against you every single day. You better do it better than I do it internally. Otherwise, I'm not going to hire you. So how are you going to do that if you don't use a large language model? So anyway, table stakes is what large language models are, and those who don't use it are going to lose those table stakes.
How does this fit with the whole 95% of the projects have no ROI? And it's just leaving you with that thought.
The future is here. It's not evenly distributed. Darth Vaughan is the future. Leo Mergel from Salesforce is the future.
I'm going to just let everyone kind of mull on that, but I'm going to move us on to the next topic, which kind of ties all of this together. And that is, for law firms right now, they're going through this sort of build and buy sort of motion. Like they're buying some stuff, they're building some stuff. And Ted, we have you on here, and there's a very specific question I have for you. And I raised this with you in the email earlier, which is, if you look at the Gen AI players, the platform players like Harvey and Legora, they are going after this position of being the law firm's operating system. Now, historically, that operating system has been the DMS or the intranet, or some blend of these kind of like traditional technologies. And you at InfoDash offer an incredible operating system for law firms. So how does that all fit? What's your vision? What's the end game for these Harvey and Legora players?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's such a multifaceted answer. So I don't think Harvey and Legora in their current iteration are capable of playing that role. And the primary reason is access to information. The Harvey partnership with Lexis, I think, is fairly surface level. Like an intranet, which is typically the landing page when a lawyer starts his day. If that law firm is a customer of ours, he'll see firm news, which can consist of maybe new wins, business wins, like, hey, we landed a new deal, or maybe a win in court, new hires, celebrations, like, work anniversaries, all of these birthdays, all those sorts of things, CLEs, that lawyers may want to sign up to, and they can navigate their way to practice pages, or they have a My View where they can see all their open matters or a list of people that they've interacted with on Teams and email. And so, like, Harvey and Lagore don't have access to it. They're never going to play that role. And then in terms of, will they be the operating system of the practice? Because those are everything I just described is mostly business of law. When Harvey tried to do a raise, maybe it was their Series B, to make a play for VLEX, I thought that was an interesting play, because that told me, that was a signal, they really want that data. And I think that would have given them a really interesting position in the marketplace. But until a material partnership, and the problem with like Harvey is they're $5 billion valuation now. They're too big for Lexis to acquire, right?
Maybe Harvey can acquire Lexis.
Oh, I was having a conversation with Ben Whitewick from AutoLogics about this, but I don't want to interrupt just yet. So
yeah, well, I mean,
let's go back to that.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. And God, what was it? What new school company was it that eclipsed an old school? There's been,
well, it was Time Warner. AOL Time Warner.
AOL bought
bought
Time Warner.
Yeah.
I mean, that was such a mind-blowing thing for everybody, because here you have this established media company, and here comes this startup that's putting CDs and magazines that fall out, and they're buying Time Warner. That turned out to be a complete disaster, by the way. But
dial-up is the future.
So yeah.
Well, and not Anthropic, Perplexity made a bid for Chrome just last week. I mean, same thing.
That didn't surprise me, because these LLMs are running, and I'm going to take us down another direction with that. But LLMs have run out of data. There is no more data for them to train on. So it's either synthetic data, or if these AI companies build a browser, then they have your data, how you use the platform, which is a whole nother dimension. And I think a huge advantage for, if somebody can displace Chrome in the browser marketplace, and it's an AI company, they've got all sorts of data they can access.
Yeah, I think you're right that they've run out of public data, but there's a ton of private data. So Chrome has private data, and I don't know if you guys saw this morning that OpenAI and others are partnering and buying data, private data, from people like Shopify. Shopify's customer data is something that they're paying for. So I think you're right that they're running out of public data, so they're looking at private sources and paying a lot of money for those private sources of data. And I would say for the legal realm, we have a ton of quote unquote public data that hasn't been parsed, and that's called PACER. That is, the court system has, $2 billion worth of private, but actually public judicial opinions. High quality human created data, just waiting to be exploited. I would say that OpenAI, if they're listening, and I'm sure that Horace, I'm sure they always listen to our podcast, if they want to go ahead and make PACER free, that's a good source of high quality human created data.
You guys kind of tied a bow on it with the will Harvey buy Lexis. I think until there's a material relationship that's not surface level between these Gen AI players and the information providers. I mean, you've got co-counsel, right? But we didn't include them in that initial list. The leverage that they have to play that operating system for the practice, I think, is diminished. I really think there needs to be a better story there before that happens.
I agree. And I think that we've seen this operating system play before. And the problem with being the operating system is that there can be only one. But there are many LLMs, right? So Legal Tech, Harvey and Lagore are trying to be the operating system, just like Thomson Reuters and Lexis have tried to be the operating system. So many law firms have both, right? Microsoft and Apple before them tried to be the operating system, but now you have mixed in here. So I think the point is that everyone, even though they want to be the operating system, they want to have a monopoly, obviously because that makes more money. That never happens. Everyone must be part of an ecosystem. So the best you can hope for is to say, I have a high percentage of the mind share and the user share. So you can never be the operating system.
I don't disagree.
Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. And Damien, our usual question is, what is making you optimistic? So Ted, maybe we'll throw to you first. What's making you optimistic?
We touched on it briefly, which is the states playing around with the new ABS rules. And it's been a huge success. I mean, it's really early. Like, I think the first ABS licenses were granted in early this year. KPMG was early on that list, like maybe February. If they can be successful, and Utah has their sandbox ABS program, if these can be successful and private capital has a more straightforward path into this industry, because again, that MSO model is really a backdoor. If they have a more straightforward path into the industry to deploy capital, to build innovations and these tech-enabled legal service delivery machines, I think that we see a dramatic acceleration. Right now, we've got a walled garden. The U.S. legal market is a walled garden. In the UK, you have the Legal Services Act. It's been around, almost 20 years now. Not much has happened as a result of it. And people point to that. They're like, look, ABS rules, look at the LSA. Look, that was pre-Gen AI, before there was a very material disruption in how language gets processed, which is, as we know, law is a very language-heavy industry. So I'm really excited about that. And I can't wait for it to spread to other areas. So we see more Crosbys and Garfields. I think that will be a good day for legal consumers.
I'm going to piggyback on my optimism is also Ted's optimism. This last week, I had a conversation with a major ABS in Arizona who I asked to be a part of my talk, which I'm going to be giving with Dan Katz on the unauthorized practice of law and ABSs and how unauthorized practice of law statutes might go away not with a bang, but with a whimper. So I asked this large Arizona ABS to be able to get on stage with me to be able to talk about that. And that person was saying, no, I don't want to incur the legal liability, even though I 100% agree with you that we are eating the lunches of law firms, but we want to be under the radar of this. And we don't want to be on stage saying this because I'd probably get fired because my person would say, why are you talking about this in public? So I think this is happening. Law firms have not had competition since the unauthorized practice of law statute came out in the 1930s. Anybody who's read Auto Clubs, written by a Stanford law professor, saying that the origins of the unauthorized practice of law statutes were always about protecting the guild. Like in the 1910s and 1920s, you could have the American Automobile Association represent you if you got in a car accident. They would represent you legally. A bank would be able to represent you legally for your contracts. So before the 1930s, non-lawyers could be able to do all sorts of legal work. But then in the 1930s, a bunch of lawyers lost work in the Great Depression. And then they got all of these unauthorized practice of law statutes passed. So the UK gets along fine, thank you very much, without any unauthorized practice of law statute. And they're skimming along quite well. So I think that the Arizona ABSs are kind of doing what has been done in the UK and others. And I think that law firms that don't see this train coming down the track, they're deluding themselves, I guess is one way to say it. So I guess it's weird to make that my optimism, but I think I'm optimistic that our profession as a whole is going to get better. Because competition, if I'm competing with other people, then that makes me better. And I would say that law firms, if they compete with the corporations that Ted mentioned, I think everyone's going to be better.
I'm going to piggyback off both of you and put a little bit of different spin on it. I don't know how many steps there are to like addiction recovery. I think it's either 7 or 12, but the first step is acceptance of reality. And I believe the law firms are now starting to accept the reality of change. Language models, smaller law firms, ABSs, they're all changing how law firms have to operate and bill. And I think that's going to end up being better for all the clients and recipients of legal services.
Completely agree.
100% agree.
Yeah. And we didn't even mention A to J in there. That's another massive benefit.
We don't have that much time left.
It's also a big pot of money that is just waiting to be exploited. The 92% of legal needs, that's a lot of money there that in the aggregate might eclipse what our current legal spend are. But that is, again, something for another day.
Well, this has been an awesome crossover episode, Ted. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun being on the guest side of the table instead of the host.
I always love listening to your podcast, Ted, and I'm really thrilled to see you in person at ILTA, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I had a blast. We'll do it again soon.
And thank you for everyone for listening. Have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.